Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
This evening, our hearts are pulled, as usual, in many different directions. Trying to make sense of the world, to feel hopeful about a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, attempting as well to not become pessimistic about the future of this country, and to understand the vicissitudes of our own lives with so many blessings and curses in everyday life. And as I hold all of it, knowing that tomorrow Rabbi Timoner will be speaking at length about Israel, I want to meditate with you instead this evening on this week's Torah portion, Bechukotai, and one of the major lessons I think we learned from this week's final section of Leviticus. Im bechukotai telechu, this parsha begins. If you follow my laws, ve'et mitzvotai tishmeru, and you observe my commandments, ve'asitem otam, and do them, all manner of blessing will shine upon you. And of course, if you don't follow God's commandments, then, according to the text, you will be cursed. From these very first words, and then onward throughout the parsha, Bechukotai lays out a conditional agreement, saying that in order for good things to happen to you, you must do exactly what God says. And right off the bat, the text loses credibility for most of us modern readers. We are not the first generation of Jews to know that sometimes bad things happen to people who follow all the commandments. And surely good things happen to those of us who don't succeed at following them all. Even our most ancient sages understood that something must be missing in the Parsha's calculus. Early rabbis taught that if a person doesn't follow all of God's laws, they can still receive blessing by repenting and doing tshuva. And they explain that following one important commandment is sometimes equal to following them all. These are good. These are nice rabbinic reframings. I admire them and basically agree with them. But I think they let the parsha off too easily. These statements belie a greater truth in this parsha, which is that God does expect something from us. Our Torah includes 613 commandments, and we are responsible as Jews to grapple with each of them, even if we may not always perform all of them. But whether or not we can expect blessing to come from performing commandments, we might ask, why does God need us to perform commandments at all? Why does the character of God appear so needy at times and so fragile in the Torah? If God loves the Israelite people, and for that matter, if God has the power to presumably get anything God wishes, why is it that God seems to need so much from us? Isn't it enough merely to treat each other fairly, to follow the laws that make sense in modern life? Why does God need us to follow all these commandments to prove ourselves worthy? Part of the answer might be found in the very first clause of this parsha, Im bechukotai telechu, if you follow my chukim, my laws. But these specific commandments, chukim, as in bechukotai, are not just laws. The rabbis understand the word chukim to refer to the laws in our tradition that aren't immediately obvious for us as human beings. Laws like wearing tzitzit, or keeping kosher, or not mixing wool and linen in our garments. It's these laws in particular that take precedence in the parsha as a key requirement for receiving blessing. We might therefore say that by performing commandments that are mysterious to us, by accepting that there are things in the universe we don't understand or can't control, we set ourselves up for blessing. It's not enough to follow the laws that create order in the world, those mishpatim that prohibit us from lying and stealing. In fact, maybe it's by committing to things that we can't fully explain that opens us up to the blessing of being alive. This is one of the hardest things for modern people to accept. We assume that science will give us answers for everything, and we know that some things in our world are better thanks to scientific and technological advances. But science and reason sometimes fail us. As we know, new technologies for weaponry don't always make society better, for instance. 20th century Europe proved how much destruction technology could bring about. And we are living out in real time the devastation in Gaza and Israel that military science has wrought. And on an even deeper level, we must also acknowledge that we might never attain scientific answers to why certain things happen in our lives, or most importantly, how we can live lives of meaning. And so our tradition offers us these chukim, these strange, weirdo commandments, inviting us into a world of mystery, calling us humbly to accept that the world is filled with things humans may never fully understand. The classic rabbis whose words are retained in the Midrash Rabbah taught that when God created the universe, it was by way of chukim. Ancient Jews assumed that the Torah itself was a kind of blueprint for the world, but these rabbis specify that it was the chukim in the Torah that allowed God to mark out the boundary between heaven and earth, between the sun and the moon, between sand and sea. By reading the laws that human beings may never fully understand, God marked off limits of existence that remain perplexing to humankind. Only by following laws that are mysterious, they suggest to us, can we attempt to get closer to the secrets of the universe. This might not do it for you. I get it. But faced with so much we can't understand, why, for instance, bad things happen to good people, this rabbinic commentary asks us to remember that there is merit in accepting that some things defy human explanation. And sometimes a commandment like wearing tzitzit is good and meaningful even if we don't really understand why we do it. It may be that God's punishments for not living up to the commandments do not come from a desire to punish, but rather a desire to deter us from taking the wrong path in life. With our focus on chukim, we might add that the wrong path is one that leads us away from purpose or meaning-making in our lives and not toward it. The great 20th century Martin Buber explained that when we get bogged down by the minutiae of each commandment, we forget that the point of any commandment is to be in relationship with the divine. Commandments are in the second person. In his words, they begin with the I, and every one of them addresses the thou in person. An I commands and a thou, every thou who hears another thou is commanded. Now, Martin Buber is rather poetic and somewhat difficult to understand at times, but what he's saying is that every single commandment, from the most rational to the most ridiculous, is an attempt at connection with some kind of purpose, some kind of creator. We may not actually find the answers we seek, but the pursuit of answers is what gives our lives meaning. Each of us today performing these rituals enters a crucible in which meaning is forged. That is, if we want it to be. If we allow ourselves the space to accept truth in places where we didn't expect it. And if we move beyond the strangeness of saying these words, bowing and praying and studying, we open ourselves up to the possibility of more purpose in our lives than we might have thought was there. These days, it is very easy to succumb to despair, to think that all of this is happening in life for no purpose at all. And it's very easy to maybe wish for blessing, but to assume that the curses, or rather curses in general, will abound no matter what we do. As the war rages on, as our own election season gets louder and scarier, and as each day brings difficult personal news compounding all the rest of it, it is so easy to feel afraid or desperate. Notwithstanding the many historical or scientific explanations we might offer for why the world has become so unstable, we still have to find some way of living in it. And seeking wisdom in Jewish tradition in spite of how much we may not understand about it is one way to do that. And that is, I think, the reason for this parsha's conditional mood. If we accept that there is mystery in our world, if we accept that there is that mystery, if we lean into it and don't try to control it, leaving room for all that will remain unknown, then we open ourselves up to the possibility of blessing. Shabbat Shalom.